Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. My ex always hated our dog, but he probably would have taken her too if she weren't so ugly. If Lulu were one of those cute mini golden doodles or corgis, or even one of those goofy-looking dogs that are charming in their ugliness. Think Danny DeVito or Steve Buscemi, only in dog version. Then I have no doubt he would have claimed ownership of her too, along with everything else in our apartment. But Lulu is just a plain old ugly dog, and for that and so much else about her, I'm forever grateful. I don't want to talk about my ex too much here, because this isn't about him. But I do need to explain why I was traveling across the country in the middle of the night with my few worldly possessions loaded up in the back of a bumpy U-Haul van. My ex and I had been together 6 years, never married. He said marriage was outdated. I said fine. Was I upset by that? Yes and no. Well, yes. But I kept quiet. I loved him. 5 months ago, he tells me he wants to split up. He said it just like that. I want to split up. No shaking of the hands, no tears in his eyes. Not even a change in the tone of his voice. I was in the kitchen when it happened, eating honey bunches of oats for breakfast. He was standing in the hall. I want to split up, he said, and then he grabbed his bag and left for work, leaving me to sob as my cereal got soggy in the bowl. Lulu heard me crying and nuzzled her snout in my lap. She whimpered along with me as the hours went by. I skipped work that day, sat on the couch and watched the sunlight pass over the walls of the apartment I'd always thought of as our home together. The thing is, my ex made way more money than me. He was happy to cover the bulk of the rent, he'd said. Happy to buy the furniture. Happy to lease the new car for us. Happy to pay for this and that, loading up our apartment with nice things. When the time came for me to move all the things that were actually mine out of the place, I realized I had even less than I did 6 years ago. It all barely filled the U-Haul van. I didn't have a couch or chairs. Those were his on paper. I didn't have any dishes or silverware. We'd thrown out my old ones when he'd bought a fancy new set a couple years ago. I didn't even have a mattress. He'd gotten us an expensive memory foam king size. I remember I'd always wanted to let Lulu hop up on that bed to snuggle while we watched movies in our room. My ex wouldn't hear of it. Stop treating the dog like it's a person, he'd said. She's lucky she gets to even live inside the apartment with us. I was the one who got Lulu from the pound, back when she was a puppy. She's a street dog, or she was, until the people from animal control swept her up one day as she'd been rummaging through an overturned trash can. You can tell she's got a good amount of pit bull in her, but beyond that she's an all-American mutt with a big boulder of a head, a weirdly thin body, and stumpy legs. She waddles more than walks, and she snores like crazy, but she's a total sweetheart. When she sees kids, she lies on her belly and waits until they get close before she gives them kisses. We didn't even train her to do that. One afternoon about a year or so ago, Lulu came up behind my ex and licked his ankles, and he turned and gave her a small kick right in the head. It wasn't enough to hurt Lulu, but that was when I should have known. Looking back, it's amazing how much you can convince yourself someone is who they're not. So the U-Haul was packed, I'd quit my hourly job, and I was now on the road toward my sister's place in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I'd been promised a place to stay for the time being. It was a 10-plus hour drive, just Lulu and me in the front of the van as we rumbled through the endless pastoral of farmland and cow towns. I'd purposefully decided to take the smaller highway to avoid traffic, since I was still uncomfortable driving the U-Haul, and the scenery made me glad I did. Tall fast food signs rose up into the sky like totem poles against clouds so big and white they almost made you want to cry. But I'd promised myself I was done crying, or at least until I'd gotten off the road. I'd had to pack the U-Haul by myself, so it had already been early afternoon by the time I set off. After about 4 hours on the road, the sky began to dim over the highway. Just as the sun sunk beneath the ridges of the mountains in the distance, I heard a loud clang somewhere below my feet. All at once, the U-Haul van started shaking. It felt like the wheel was fighting against me. I kept having to grip it and yank it back straight. I had trouble seeing out the back window because my stuff was piled up, but I managed to get over to an exit that was just ahead. As I slowed the van down now that I was off the highway, I saw a sign sticking out from the roadway. Richard and Sons Auto Repair. A quarter mile ahead. I know you've probably heard a story like this before. A story where a car breaks down in the middle of nowhere on a backroads highway. a young woman by herself. Maybe she meets a creepy guy in overalls who says something like, "Well, you must be lost, little missy," as he eyes her like she's a good meal he's about to devour. But it really wasn't like that. "Evening, ma'am," said the perfectly normal-looking guy inside the auto repair shop. "How can I help you? Oh, and who's this cutie?" he added, taking notice of Lulu at my side. The shop's owner was a man named Richard Meadows, and he was a pleasant, polite, and well-dressed older gentleman, his gray hair neatly combed and his buttoned shirt starched bright white. He ran the place with his 2 sons, both of whom were waiting in the garage. "My sons Abel and Dean will run diagnostics. Then you and I can head into the office to call the U-Haul folks," Richard said as we walked up to them. "Don't want this to be on your tab, after all. Abel, want to take the keys?" I handed the keys to the son named Abel, who was a little chubby and pale, his shaved head dotted with moles. He seemed shy and only nodded when he took the keys from me. I only mention Abel's appearance because the other son beside him, Dean, was almost shockingly handsome. He had a thick head of sandy blonde hair, a chiseled jawline, and broad shoulders under his denim work shirt. He was that level of teen movie heartthrob handsome that made my face suddenly hot. Walking with me out to the U-Haul in the lot, Dean took out a clipboard, licking the tip of his pen as he angled it downward. "So the truck just started rattling on you?" he asked. I stuttered through what had happened, feeling like a nervous high school girl again, but he just smiled and nodded the whole time, his voice calm like a doctor at a bedside. Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And like my dad said, don't worry. We'll make sure the U-Haul folks pay up, not you." I thanked him, trying to ignore the fact that I was blushing for no reason. "Good thing you've got a bodyguard here with you," Dean added, smiling down at Lulu. "What's his name?" "Her," I said. "And her name is Lulu." "Well, hi there, Lulu." When he reached down to pet her, Lulu stepped back and showed her teeth, growling under her breath. "Lulu," I said. "Bad girl." Dean just laughed. "Nah, she's cool, just protecting her mom, right, Lulu? Honestly, I wouldn't trust some random auto repair dude either." "No, it's not you. It's just my boyfriend, or I guess my ex-boyfriend now. I don't know. I guess he made her a little skittish around guys like you." Dean raised his eyebrows a little, but then he pursed his lips and nodded as if he understood, and I appreciated that he didn't ask anything further about it. He told me to go wait on him, that he'd handle everything from here. When I got back to the office, Dean's father Richard had already sorted out the bill with the U-Haul folks. "Free and clear," he said. There was nothing else to do but wait for the van to be ready. A TV hanging in the corner was playing a muted episode of Judge Judy. Richard took a seat across from me in the waiting area and petted Lulu while telling me a little about himself and his family. His wife had died 1.5 years ago, he said. Passed suddenly in her sleep, which is a mercy, I suppose. It had been a tough string of months, but he and his sons were close. They were getting him through it. Lulu seemed to sense his sadness, because she showed more attachment to him than most other male strangers. "I hope you don't mind me speaking out of turn," Richard said as he stroked Lulu's head. "But I'm relieved you have this dog here with you." "Why's that?" "Well, not to scare you, but there've been some incidents." He told me he didn't want me to cause any undue worry, but there had been 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields down the highway over the past 1.5 years. "All the victims were like you, young women traveling alone," Richard said. "So it's good you got this girl here." And he put his face close to Lulu, who licked him on the cheek. "Ah, good girl. Such a sweetie. I appreciate you giving me a heads up at least," I said. "Sure, and like I said, didn't mean to scare you. Probably nothing." "No, it's nice of you. You guys have all been really nice," I added. Dean was very helpful. "That's just the wonderful service and dedication you would expect from the world-famous team at Richard & Sons Auto Repair." Richard laughed. "But I do thank you sincerely." I almost asked if Dean had a girlfriend, as if that weren't a totally crazy and pathetic question to pose to a total stranger. But before I had the chance to embarrass myself, the other son, Abel, shuffled into the office and murmured something to his father. Richard nodded, saying to me, "Well, looks like you're all set. No paperwork or anything?" "Nope, all taken care of. Get you a receipt for insurance purposes, but otherwise you're good to go. Here, let me walk you and Lulu out." On our way out of the office, I debated the merits of giving Dean my number, trying to balance the pros and cons. Was it better to risk wild embarrassment if I get rejected, versus the regret I might feel if I did nothing? I was so new to the single life again that I didn't know how any of this worked anymore. It turns out the decision was made for me, because Dean was gone when we got to the van. "Dean head off already?" Richard asked. Abel nodded. Had a date, he said in that whisper-quiet voice of his. Oh, another date? Why am I not surprised? Of course, I thought. And really, what did I expect? Just because Dean was working at some Nowheresville auto repair shop didn't change the fact that he was still wildly handsome and easy to talk to. If anything, girls probably swooned over the fact that he could take a car apart by hand, peeling off his shirt afterward, his muscles gleaming with sweat, etc., etc. I felt like an idiot. Well, sure was great to meet you, Richard said. And so nice to meet you too, Miss Lulu. His son Abel reached into his pocket and dangled the keys out in front of me, while Richard got down and gave Lulu one last head scratch. I took the keys from Abel and smiled. Thank you, I said. He smiled back, but he didn't break eye contact, and for a split second a shudder passed through my body, something I can't explain. Drive safe, he breathed. The backroad highway that night was dark, what my sister would call country dark, but what I would call horror movie dark. It seemed the smaller highways like this were only busy during the day, because I only saw a car pass by every few minutes or so. Fields of corn along the roadside swayed under a cloud-choked moon. The night air was punctuated by faraway train whistles, which sounded to me more like muffled screams. I don't know if I was just freaked out by the warning Richard had given me, or if there really was something to be said about this stretch of highway, but I kept getting a feeling as if eyes were staring out at me from the fields. I sensed I was driving into the mouth of a beast, already on my way to being digested by the darkness. Up ahead, the cornfields ended and were overtaken by forest, a dense swath of evergreen trees, and the moment we drove past the fields, Lulu started barking. I swear I almost crashed the car. Oh my God, Lulu! Lulu, calm down. She was going crazy, turning her head side to side as she barked back at whatever we'd just passed on the side of the road. Lulu, relax, girl. But I couldn't even say that without my own voice choking up. 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields, Richard had said. My hands felt slippery on the wheel. I'd never been comfortable driving a U-Haul van before, and it didn't help that the darkness seemed to devour the headlamps, so that I could barely see a few feet in front of me down the highway. I tried turning on the radio, got static, and turned the dial, but then thought the better of it and shut it off again. Better to be in silence, just in case. In case what? My mind was going in so many directions. And even saying there was silence would be wrong, because every few minutes Lulu started up again, pawing at the back seat and the windows, barking like crazy and growling. It was like she was fighting a ghost and wanted to break out of the car. I glanced out the windows but could only see darkness on either side of the road, that along with the shadowed outlines of trees, stumps, power lines, all of which looked like monsters to me. Eventually we entered South Carolina. We passed out of the rural area, and it was only when the bright flood lamps of passing car dealerships and 24-hour fast food places illuminated the inside of the cabin that Lulu fell silent. But even then, for the last 3 hours of the car ride, she never fully relaxed. Especially when we passed through the occasional pockets of empty rural areas, she seemed stressed. Occasionally she'd perk up, as if she'd seen someone outside our window, floating along with us. Her body language would stiffen. By now I just let it happen. I told myself she was just tense from traveling. She seemed desperate by the end of the trip. I could tell she was exhausted. She hadn't slept all night. I was exhausted too. Lulu's howls and barks had kept me alert, but it hadn't exactly done well for keeping my eyes on the road. I felt the kind of twitchy panic that usually came from drinking too much coffee, my eyes darting from side to side, feeling like I was about to crash into something any minute. My sister had texted me before she went to bed and told me the key was under the mat. It was around 3 a.m. when I pulled up to the curb outside her house and put the van in park. When I did, Lulu shot up. Okay, yes, we're here, girl. You can relax now. In the glow of the van's cab, as I reached over to grab my night bag, I could hear Lulu breathing deeply. She was taking fast and muffled breaths, panting. It sounded like she was trying to catch her breath after running. Hey, chill out, I said as I grabbed my bag and sat up again. What are you panting for, girl? We're all ready. I froze. Lulu was totally still beside me. She was facing the back of the van. Her mouth was closed. Her tongue wasn't hanging out. Her chest wasn't rising and falling. She was calm and focused, breathing slowly and silently. It wasn't her. The breathing wasn't her. It was coming from somewhere in the back of the van. Just then, Lulu showed her teeth and growled. Oh, okay, girl, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. I was shaking. I could barely feel my body. I was floating outside of it, Let's head on inside now, come on. I fumbled with the door handle. I almost fell when I stepped out. I tried taking out my phone and dialing 911, but my hand was shaking so bad I couldn't even unlock my home screen. Lulu hopped out and circled me. She was on high alert. Her head was low, and she moved like a predator, keeping close to my legs. I walked backwards with her up the driveway, but she stayed between me and the van, pacing quickly from side to side. I managed to get my phone unlocked. I was about to hit the emergency call button when I heard something move inside the van, a metallic click. The back door, I realized. I'd locked it, but it could still open from the inside. The street was dark, only one lamppost glowing off at the intersection down the road. Everyone in their homes were asleep. I was totally alone. In the darkness, I heard something scrape at the back door from inside the van. Then a soft clunk as the door opened. It opened slowly at first, as if a creature inside were checking to see if it were safe. I hit the emergency call button, just as the door swung all the way open. 911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency? But I couldn't speak. I was frozen. The door bounced back as it fully opened, and then out fell a naked body, tangled limbs hitting the pavement, a mess of blonde hair shimmering in the dark. When the person rose up again, I almost passed out. It was Dean. Hello? Hello? I said into the phone. I need help. Someone, he was in my van. Please send police to. Lulu barked and jumped forward. Jesus fucking Christ, Dean said, shaking out his limbs. Can someone please tell this fucking dog to shut up? Dean was covered in sweat, wearing only his boxer shorts. He looked sickly and diseased. All fucking night it's just bark, 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 yap, yap, yap. He exhaled and stretched out his arms, and I saw he was holding a knife in his hand. With his free hand, he swiped back the sweaty hair off his forehead. Cooped up in a hot-ass truck for hours under all your useless shit. Had to take off my clothes, it was so damn hot. And I gotta hear that fucking dog barking non-stop. Please send help, I said into the phone, repeating my sister's address over and over. Please, he's got a knife. Oh, he's got a knife, does he? Oh, boo-hoo. And Dean walked forward, holding the knife out toward Lulu, tossing it casually from hand to hand. Every time I try to make a move, this bitch goes nuts on me. Yap, 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 yap. Dean, please, just, I don't know what you want, but please. You should be thanking me, you know that? He waved the knife from side to side, as if reprimanding me. I'm way out of your league, so the fact that I chose you tonight, it's really an act of charity. Okay, I said. I would have said anything to get him to go away. Okay, I'm sorry. You want the truth? It wasn't even me who wanted you. I thought you were a 6, maybe a 7 at best. But my brother? He thought you looked tasty enough. So I say, okay, fine. Sure, I'll get you and bring you back to him. I'm a good brother, aren't I? That's what good brothers do. They do favors. I wanted his first time to be special. No, I know you're a good brother. I still held the phone up to my ear, hoping the operator could hear me. This all could have been so easy. So fucking easy. Would have been over by now. But no, because Miss Yap 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 over here. He gripped the knife tight, squatting as he stepped forward, his eyes on Lulu. So keep on crying into the phone, but make sure you tell them your dog is dead too, because the bitch deserved it. No! Dean lunged forward, slashing the knife at her. Lulu yelped and flipped to the side as the blade swept across her back, her body scrambling over the pavement. But then it was Dean who screamed, falling back as his knife landed on the ground. Fuck! Jesus Christ! My hand! Even in the darkness I could see the blood pour from Lulu's back where the blade had sliced her open. But I could also see her spit out a mangled hand onto the pavement, as if it were nothing but a squeaky toy. I'm gonna kill this dog! Dean screamed. Blood poured from the stump at his wrist. With his other hand, he reached down to grab the knife, then turned to face her. But Lulu was already upon him, lunging up in the air, her own blood streaking off the gash in her back as she flew. This time, she aimed for his face. A severed hand, it turns out, is a more than adequate DNA sample. It only took a few days before the police were able to match Dean's DNA with the DNA found on the bodies of the 7 women who were found in the woods down the highway from the auto repair shop. Dean's mugshot showed a guy with a mutilated, torn-up face, bruised and bloody, and held together with stitches. When the police had arrived that night outside my sister's house, they had found him half dead on the sidewalk, blood leaking from his neck. As for Lulu and me, I had already carried her inside the house. The police found us on the tile floor of the kitchen, Lulu bleeding out in my lap, unmoving, while I whispered to her, I love you, girl. I love you so much. It wasn't long before Dean's brother Abel was arrested as an accessory to the crimes. During a news conference a few days later, the police chief said that for the past year and a half, the two brothers had been using road traps on the backroad highway to cause damage to passing vehicles, forcing them to stop. In most cases, they fixed the cars, and that was that. Nothing more than a scam to gain business for their father's shop. But when the driver was a pretty young woman, the two used the shop's tow truck to lure the women away to a remote location past the cornfields. DNA samples from at least 4 of the women were found inside the truck. With the last would-be victim, the brothers appeared to have gotten reckless and instead lured her right to the repair shop, said the police chief during the press conference. Had the young woman not been accompanied by her dog, a pit bull mix by the name of Lulu, there's no telling what. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to hear the rest. Later, I saw in an online article a photo of their father Richard, shielding his face as reporters surrounded him. There was no evidence he'd been involved in any way. He'd seemed shocked when the police came to the auto shop. I felt bad for him. He seemed like a good man. I couldn't even imagine what he was thinking. The police chief had said the brothers had been committing the assaults and murders for the last year and a half, which means they would have started right after their mother died. The timing made me feel sick. Richard had said his wife's death was from natural causes, that she'd died peacefully in her sleep. I like to believe that's the case. I like to believe the brothers had waited for their mother to die, and that's the only reason they started their murderous spree right after her funeral. Despite all they did, I really hope, if only for Richard's sake, that they hadn't gotten impatient and done something to their own mother. It was surreal trying to get settled in a new place after all this. I felt like my old life had been years and years ago. My ex did text me once, though, just after he heard the news. "Hope you're okay," the text said. Normally I would have sat for hours, deliberating over how to respond. But now I texted back right away. "I am," I said. I watched 3 dots pop up in the bubble as he was typing something, then they disappeared again. That night, the news ran a segment about Lulu. There was a whole ceremony in her honor. Normally I wouldn't have watched the rest of the coverage of the case. It was already traumatic enough. I was told I would have to testify, that it would be a long process, and I wanted to avoid it as much as I could. But I made sure to watch the news segment on Lulu. A moment of celebration today as Lulu the scrappy pit bull mix gets a hero's welcome outside the East Side Animal Hospital, said the news anchor. So many people had showed up to the animal hospital earlier that afternoon to celebrate Lulu's discharge. The footage held on Lulu's face as she eyed the crowd of police officers, the news crews, the reporters, and hospital staff. I was right beside her in the footage, looking just as awkward. "See that girl?" I said as I watched the coverage with her later that night. Lulu was curled on my lap on the couch as I stroked the long scar on her back, the jagged ridges where the animal doctors had sewn her up again. "That's you and me on the news, see, girl?" Lulu had been sleeping, and now she lifted up her head, drowsy from the commotion of the day. She didn't seem too interested about her 15 minutes of fame. She just sighed and plopped her head right back down again on my stomach, and went back to sleep. When the news was over, I nudged Lulu awake, and after she went outside to pee, the two of us shuffled down the hall. I led Lulu into the guest bedroom. As I pulled down the covers on the bed, Lulu went to lie down on the hardwood floor in the corner of the room, by herself. No, come here, girl." She glanced up at me, one paw on top of the other. I patted the bed. "You sleep up here from now on. Come on up." She made a soft noise, her tail wagging. Then she hopped up awkwardly on the bed, still a little sore from her wounds. As I shut off the lamp, Lulu nuzzled up against my legs, resting her head on my thigh. "Comfy?" I asked. She sighed a grumbly, growling purr in response. "Get used to it, pretty girl," I said. "You've more than earned it." A few days ago, I wrote a fictional story, and I posted it onto Reddit on an alternative account. I can't tell you which subreddit it was exactly. For one thing, I don't want you to actively seek it out. However, if you are drawn to the world of horror and are in the habit of reading horror stories online, there is a chance you may come across it. There is the trend now of reposting things from Reddit, and I fear terribly that my story may have been cross-posted to elsewhere on the internet by now, so you need to heed my warning. I'll admit, I hesitated before I pressed the submit button. There was a twinge of fear in my stomach. But those were just nerves, I reasoned. I was afraid of negative feedback. I don't know where it ended up, that story of mine. I don't care about the popularity or the upvotes. Even in the unlikely event it ended up on the Reddit front page, I would go back and delete it if I could. Actually, the more popular it was, the more it ought to be deleted, really. Because that means more people have been exposed. I wish the damned idea had never come into my mind. So, I need to warn you. You're in danger, just by seeking out tales of horror to read. Sometimes, you get more than you bargained for. I apologize for the length, but you need to know everything. Something that I'll always regret is that I didn't listen to my inner voice before submitting that story. If I have one piece of advice I can give you before this unnamed creature takes me, it would be this: never ignore your instinct. It wants the best for you. Instinct. It's something that is inherent in all living creatures. It is something that is not learned, something that cannot be taught. Animals have clear instincts, and they always follow them. A squirrel doesn't need to be taught how to dig to hide away food. This behavior comes naturally, even when it has been born and raised in captivity. It inherently knows that it needs to protect its food from competitors and store away for when food is scarce. An innate protective behavior. Survival. A duckling will instinctively follow its mother duck everywhere. This is not something it has learned. It is something that is innate, a behavior pre-programmed and hardwired. Through following its mother, it stays protected from threats and is guaranteed food. Survival. An infant kangaroo rat will instinctively launch into an escape jump maneuver when it hears the sound of a rattlesnake, even when it hasn't ever heard the sound before, or had formed any rational knowledge of what rattlesnakes are. An innate, inbuilt reaction. Survival. That's what an innate instinct is. Not learned, not rational, not something you think about. An instinctive response, for the good of your survival. Us modern humans, though, we're so muddled up on that front, aren't we? We pride ourselves on our rationality. Humans know instinctively that danger can lurk in the dark, that the darkness is something we ought to be cautious of. Cavernous, deep darkness instinctively evokes a fear response in us, for the good of our survival. Not rational, just instinctive. But we modern humans, we think ourselves beyond these base instincts, don't we? We suppress our natural fear. We often even mock and disparage those who do not simply ignore their instinctive fears. We have constructed these shimmering, glowing cityscapes with tall, bright steel towers aglow with lights, cities and worlds that never sleep, to push away the darkness. We introduced electricity so light can be infused into our homes on command. Whenever we need it, we can expel the darkness at the flick of a switch. And in the midst of all this technology, we became dazzled by the bright lights and arrogant in our achievements. We allowed these unnatural lifestyles to suppress and blind our natural instincts. Rationality became a prized domain, and any inclination towards the basic instinct of fear became labeled irrational. Some of us, we seek to fill the void, to escape the numbness, the unnatural monotony of modern-day living, and feel that thrill of adrenaline, the fear. You know what I mean? That's why you're here. Some modern humans, though, don't understand that it wasn't mere intellect and rationality that brought us here. Equally, it was the irrational and unexplainable gut feeling of fear that contributed to the success of our species, too. Listening to your natural, innate, inner voice, even when it arises independently of the rational center in your brain, is just as important as being logical and intelligent. But we have gone so far the other way so as to become both ignorant and arrogant of this. It has gotten to the point now where we feel an instinct and we dismiss it, or we're so used to suppressing such feelings that we muddle things up and incorrectly interpret them. We've forgotten our native language, and so now it's all too easy to mistranslate. That's what happened to me that night, before I hit the submit button on Reddit. I incorrectly assumed that I was afraid of rejection, afraid of mockery, and then I focused my efforts upon this mistranslation of my fear. The truth is, though, that gut fear was actually my inner voice telling me, you should run the hell away from this topic, stay away from this story, don't submit. But I ignored the part of my brain that was looking out for my best interests, trying to secure my survival. A network of neurons, entirely independently of my rational frontal cortex, had picked up on something and were firing and communicating and lighting up my limbic area, my amygdala, making me feel afraid, signaling for me to run, protecting me, warning me, for the good of my survival. And I did it anyway. I pressed the submit button. I guess I'll have to start at the beginning. I have always been an avid horror fan. Reading, watching, writing. I always dreamed of giving something back to the horror world. I dreamed of crafting something that would invade people's minds and not let go. Instill a lingering chill in their psyche that would magnify every creak in their house, give life to the shadows, make them doubt their solitude when they were alone. My dream was to haunt your nightmares. Except, for the past few years, I've had stubborn writer's block. It always seemed to be there, my urge to create, but I could never get it out. It was like an elusive thought at the tip of your tongue. You want to grasp it so badly, and yet it's always evading you, no matter how hard you try. And then it happened. My path to inspiration. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, I became ill and confined to my bed. I spent most of the day listlessly browsing the internet and trying to summon up the energy to fix some dinner. My older brother, Eric, God bless him, came over as soon as he heard I was ill, with sandwiches to last me the next few days and chicken soup in a thermos. And best of all, before he left he thumped a large book down on top of my duvet. "I spotted this at a yard sale," he said. "Thought you might like it. It'll keep you busy while you're stuck in bed. Terrible creatures of lore and myth from around the world." It was an old leather-bound, hefty book with yellowing pages. I felt a thrill as soon as I opened it. I flicked through. I was engrossed even before my brother made it to the door. I was feeling slightly sick, but the book gripped me such that I forgot about my illness. The author had, apparently, traveled the world and made a record of all the unsettling things he came across. I've been a huge horror fan all my life, but even I hadn't come across most of the creatures of legend mentioned here. They were all obscure creatures of tales from remote regions, and it was fascinating. The last chapter, though, you know that thrill you feel when you come across a gripping horror story? Of course you do. That's why you're here. There's nothing quite like that feeling. You feel the dread, but you can't look away. You let the story pull you. You tumble gladly into the world built up by the words. You're terrified, but deliciously so. That's how I felt reading that chapter. I don't have the book with me now, so I'll paraphrase what it said. I've read it enough times to almost know it by heart. It described one particular creature that is said to roam the land. It has no place of origin, no place to call its own, nowhere to stay. It is always waiting for attention, waiting to be acknowledged. As soon as anyone mentions its name, it takes that as an expression of interest, as an invitation. It latches onto that person. It takes this acknowledgement of its existence as an invitation into the victim's home, a gateway into the victim's life. The book described multiple, corresponding accounts of victims that the author had come across. Well, accounts from the victims' families. The victims themselves were long dead, died of undetermined causes. The author came across multiple stories of this nature, even spanning villages and towns, and they all had something in common. The families refused to name the creature. It was a well-known creature in these communities, and there was a knowledge of its name, but it was accompanied by a resolute silence. Instances of this creature latching onto people occurred when someone mentioned the thing's name for others to hear. When others can hear its name, this means it can also hear its name, and it takes this to mean that it is being called. This had happened in these villages, the author was told, upon instances when someone had spoken of the creature either through forgetfulness, uttered the name out loud by mistake, ignorance, bravado, or disbelief. Since the demise of the victims had occurred within living memory, the inhabitants of the village had now resolved to keep the name a secret, not only for their own safety. They didn't want to invite the evil into their own lives, after all, but they also hoped that this would have the added benefit, so that knowledge of the creature's name would never be passed down to their children. The name would die with them, and so would these attacks of evil. The author, though, was equally resolute to get a name he could specify for his book. He was fascinated by the topic. His actual belief in this particular creature was lukewarm. While he believed in many of the strange and terrible tales described in his book, this particular creature, he felt, had been invented to attach hype and hysteria to cases of mental illness. He thought it was an interesting legend, though, and one he wanted to fully catalog in his book. He narrated how he had traveled from village to village, trying to bribe someone to whisper the name to him, or write it down. He was getting nowhere. Finally, he described, his fortune turned. He arranged an interview with the father of a boy who had fallen victim to the creature, and invited this man to his private lodgings. The man got extremely drunk during the course of this. I personally suspect the author may have plied the poor man with drinks, and, his reason gone, finally uttered the creature's name. The author wrote it down instantly in a notebook, and took it to the villagers to confirm if this indeed was the name he'd been seeking. Their reactions of horror were all he needed as confirmation. He described that the locals begged him not to put the name in his book for others to read. That would be exactly what the creature wanted, for its name to be heard and propagated. It would fuel the creature. It would create endless victims in corners of the world where its name had never before entered. Suddenly, the tables had turned, and now these villagers were trying to persuade him, begging him and bribing him to change his mind. First they tried to entice him with food and feasts, and later with money and jewels. The man who had told him of the creature's name was found burned alive in his house. An act of vengeance from the rest of the villagers for telling their closely guarded secret to a stranger, and allowing the evil of the name to be set loose upon the world. This made the author even more bent upon writing his book in full. He was disgusted by the villagers. The villagers insisted they hadn't done anything. This was the unnamed creature's doing. However, this made the author even more firm on his belief that this story had been founded merely by hype and superstition. They used this legend to add hysteria around mental illness and to excuse their own wrongdoings. This story was unlike the others he had come across. The described victim's terrors were so entirely subjective. He became resolute that it was time to end this childish terror of uttering a few simple syllables. When he remained undeterred in his conviction to include the name in his book, they chased him out of the village. He was a tool of the evil creature, they now said. The creature had been growing desperate to be acknowledged once more. It was determined not have its name fade into oblivion. Now, its name would be spoken abroad, with endless carnage and countless more victims. The author, too, would be a victim because he was propagating the name. It didn't only have to be spoken aloud for the creature to be summoned. If he propagated the name to others even though writing, it could be taken as an invitation, they said. Resolute, he left the village and finished his book. That chapter was the final chapter in the book. There was an epilogue from a guest writer, who said that the author had been struck down with a fever and malady of the mind shortly after completing the book. Ironically, on his deathbed, he begged for the book not to be published, and revoked his publishing agreement before he died. Those in charge of his affairs after his death, however, deemed this to be a moment of illness-induced insanity. The book was something he had devoted such a large portion of his life and energy upon, and if he'd been in his right mind, he would have wanted it to be taken to publication. They saw it as an exercise in anthropology. The publishing agreement was cancelled, but they took it to a small press and published a handful of books, so his legacy might live on, and his years of hard work and intellectual pursuit not go to waste. I finished the last page breathless. I was glad I had read it, but also mentally cursing myself, because reading something like that doesn't do well for a fever-addled brain, as mine was at the time. I had jumbled and disturbing dreams whenever I drifted into sleep. I sympathized for the poor author who had died in the midst of a fever, back when medical treatments were still in relative infancy. There were times when I fancied that I might be dying myself, because in my dreams, I became the author and the book became my work, and it was all incredibly confusing. Typical crazy, muddled, tired and no brain stuff. Over the next few days, the fever passed, and I was back to full mental and bodily strength. I reread the last chapter in the book a few more times, and it was as though it lit a fire in my mind. A thrill of excitement. It was a relatively unknown piece of folklore, and would make for excellent horror story material. It was time that Reddit was introduced to this creature and the mythos surrounding it. The story and the way the book ended was, well, a little unsettling, admittedly, but it did make rational sense. He had just returned home after traveling foreign exotic lands. All sorts of diseases he could catch while there. Anticipating the anxious reader's interpretation, the epilogue had even included the official note from the doctor, who had described a swelling of the arm from a foreign insect bite. But still, perhaps it wasn't a disease. I shook my head and tried to shake the thoughts away. I went onto the laptop, and it was as though my recent illness had somehow rejuvenated my mind. The words flowed easily, and I typed and typed, my mind alit with the excitement of this new world I was creating for my readers to explore. I didn't stop to eat or drink. I didn't even stop to draw the curtains when the sun went down. I was sitting in a darkened room with the only source of light being the glow from my laptop screen, illuminating my face, and a mild glow coming in from the streetlights outside. Utter silence except for the steady clatter of my fingers of the keyboard. I was lost to the world. Finally, I was done. I had written my first complete story for years. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling jubilant and cautiously optimistic. It was a fictional account of a man whose wife had been affected by the creature. It detailed the legend behind the creature and all the horror it left in its wake. The title of my short story was the name of the creature. It was pretty good, I thought. I reread the story aloud as I always do after writing anything, to make sure my words flowed and made sense. Then I created a new Reddit account. My username was the same name as the title of the story. The name was cursed according to the mythos, and I was using it as my username. It would add to the thrill. I copy-pasted those precious words of mine into the subreddit's submission box. As soon as I did, I felt a twinge of hesitance. I only was afraid of being attacked, I reasoned, by disgruntled Redditors. I was afraid of being disparaged, of having spent time on something, of having invested sincere energy into something, and not getting any acknowledgement for it. What if no one read it? Worse still, what if they read it but they didn't like it? Doubt not at me. Don't submit it. But then again, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I ignored my gut instinct, and I hit the submit button. My eyes instantly flicked to the number of upvotes. It's natural, isn't it? Oh, what a blessed and simple time that was, when my only fear was that of online mockery. How naive I was then. After staring at my submission and monitoring how it had been received, I finally decided that I had been sitting in the same place for too long, and that perhaps it was time to draw the curtains. What provoked me into finally moving was the sound of meowing and barking coming from next door. Cat and dog fight. The sound was irritating, and I wanted to close the window as well as curtain to mute it. I got up from my desk and walked to the window, blinking. There was the afterimage of my laptop screen still in the middle of my vision. A glowing rectangle burned into my retina, after having stared at it in the dark for so long. I blinked a few times and waited for it to fade. The street outside was deserted. It seemed like a contradiction, because it was so empty, and yet so noisy. There was more than one dog barking. More had joined in now. And more cats, too. Meowing, barking, howling, and morosely wailing. You could hear a few owners shouting at their pets to get them to pipe down, but to no avail. And yet, the street was lifeless and still. I sighed. It took just one animal to start some noise, and it would spook the others, and they would all join in. The street itself was entirely deserted, except for a tall, lanky figure standing on the pavement a few houses down, motionless. It was standing underneath a lamppost that was unlit, so I couldn't see it. I almost dismissed it, except, just as I was about to draw the curtains, a car passed by. Its headlights illuminated the road and pavements for the few seconds it took to pass by. The light was coming towards me, but the figure was backlit, so it was only visible as a black outline. In that moment, though, I could see that the shape didn't seem quite right. I squinted, and although this person was facing me, it seemed that he didn't have a face. Just a blank piece of skin where the facial features should be. I couldn't look away. And then the car passed, and everything was plunged into darkness again. I could see its silhouette still, but without light, couldn't make out any details. But as the moments elapsed, I grew less certain of what I had seen. A sudden trick of perspective, I reasoned. Must be some rational explanation. I hadn't seen clearly. I wasn't thinking clearly. I decided to ignore it and draw the curtains. I closed and locked the window too, so as to mute that the terrible noise the animals were making. Out of sight, out of earshot, out of mind, trying to be a rational, sensible human. Twice that night, ignoring my innate fear instinct. I grabbed a sandwich, showered, and then went to bed. I was tired. I'd worked hard all day, and sleep came quickly. My sleep was not restful, however. Strange visions plagued me all night. I can't remember anything, except for a strange screaming voice that scared me awake. He's coming for you. He's outside your window. The scream was so loud, it seemed to reverberate inside my head, like a sound that had exploded physically inside my brain. I jolted awake and upright, and I was sure someone had screamed in real life. It took me a few heart-pounding moments to reason that it had been inside my dream. I was doused in sweat now, and too uncomfortable to lie back down, and too cold and shivery to get out of bed. Part of me wanted to check outside, certain something was outside my window. So I did, but only to assuage my fears. To be rational. I looked out of the window, shivering. Was I shaking because I was drenched in sweat, or was it because I was afraid? I glanced around the empty street. No strange figure anywhere. No figures or anything anywhere at all, in fact. I sighed in relief. I went to take another shower to relax and change into fresh clothes. I thought about checking up on my story, and somehow the line popped up in my head. It takes interest in itself as an invitation into your home and into your life. And I decided that I wouldn't take check up on my story about this mythical creature, because obsessive checking of upvotes is crazy. I went back to bed, and somehow drifted back to an uneasy sleep. I didn't turn off the light. I awoke late the next morning, Yesterday, that is. And the morning sun, as it so often does, seemed to expel the previous night's terrors. It made me feel silly for yesterday's irrational unease. I went into the kitchen to make a quick breakfast, only to realize that most of the cupboards were bare, as I'd spent the past few days quarantining my bed. I made a list of groceries I'd need and got in my car. I checked the rearview mirror to back out of my drive. There was a figure standing in the garden behind me, tall and gaunt, just blank skin where the face should be. I slammed on the brakes and looked over my shoulder in panic. A tall tree. That's all it was. I laughed nervously and backed out, telling myself to keep it under control. This was absolutely ridiculous. I made it to the supermarket without any further mishaps. It was fairly early in the morning, so there weren't many people around. A handful of mothers, housewives probably, accompanied by their small children. This would have been fine, usually, especially as the lack of significant crowds meant I could complete my shopping relatively quickly. But even though there were only a small number of children there, children are often noisy and whiny, and my head was aching and feeling leaden by now. Probably because I'd gotten so little sleep the night before, I figured. Crying, screeching, annoying babies and toddlers at every turn. I'd grabbed all the things I needed to, and got in line at the checkout. A screaming, bawling fat baby was sitting in the trolley seat ahead of me. "Shoo," said the mother, rocking the trolley back and forth. I clutched my head. It was too much. I felt like my head was going to explode. It was just so abrasive. I bit my lip and just tried to wait it out. To make matters worse, another mother got into the queue next to ours, with a small toddler in tow. He too was screaming. Brilliant. Just my luck to have all the annoying children in the locale converge in the store this morning. Perhaps my fever wasn't all gone, because my head was pounding. Tension headache, though, probably. I tried my best to hide my irritation as the red-faced, screaming child adjacent to me stared as he bawled. Just wait it out. Just a few minutes to go. I wanted to stick my tongue out at the child and tell him it was rude to stare, but unfortunately his mother was right there. I tried to avert my gaze, but he kept staring. Chubby baby in front was staring at me too, as he cried. I crossed my arms and looked again at the toddler adjacent to us. "Mommy," he said, his voice whiny and loud enough to hear. "Mommy, scary man." And he pointed right at me. Charming. His mother snatched his arm and pushed it down, too-tang, and shooting me an embarrassed look when she saw that I'd noticed. "Charlie, don't be so rude," she said. I turned my head, and the baby in front of me lifted up his little arm and pointed, crying. All of the children had been crying today as I passed. All of them had been staring at me or behind me. Everything seemed to freeze as it clicked in place. Slowly, I turned my head. The tall, gaunt, faceless figure standing behind me. I blinked, and it was gone. But the children were still staring. They were still terrified. I just stood there, rooted to the spot. My heart was pounding, beating in my chest so hard that it was making breathing difficult. But it seemed the only part of my body capable of movement. Everything else was frozen. "Sir?" I snapped out of my thoughts. The baby and his mother in front had gone. The checkout girl was staring at me expectantly. "Sorry," I said. Numbly, automatically, I paid up for my shopping and headed for home. What else can you do in a situation like that? I got home. It was just my imagination. The infants were crying because I was just looking particularly horrendous that day. I was hollow-eyed and I'd gotten little sleep, and it was my first time out of the house after a particularly bad case of the flu. It was me they were starting at. My overactive mind was imposing my own recent obsession onto the situation, and for a moment my mind had made me see the figure from last night. Just for a second, a trick of the tired mind, and it was gone. I felt much calmer as I sorted my groceries into the cabinets. I'd written a stupid story and started believing it too much, getting too engrossed in it. I smiled. Well, time to see if others were as enchanted by the lore. I fixed myself a coffee and went back to my bedroom, switching on the laptop at my desk. I couldn't log into that account for some reason, so I just tried to find the story. I couldn't find it anywhere. The disappointment was like a punch in the gut. Enduring all this, and for nothing? The mods of the subreddit must have deleted it. I made a throwaway, sent a quick, polite, but tersely worded message asking why the story had been taken down, and why I couldn't log in. Had my account been banned altogether? The inbox envelope turned red surprisingly quickly. "Hi there, thanks for your message. That submission hasn't been removed. Perhaps there was an error with your page loading? I checked, it's definitely still there, we haven't taken it down." How odd. Perhaps it was just an error. I went to the search bar and started typing the story's title, named after the creature. I was about to press enter to search. There was a juddering banging. Thud, 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 on the door to my bedroom. It was so loud, I let out a shriek. The banging was so forceful, it seemed to have shaken everything in the room, like a localized earthquake. My laptop monitor had gone black. I looked at my desk and realized that my coffee mug had jolted and fallen sideways with the impact, spilling my coffee. I made no move to correct it. The liquid had seeped and gone into my laptop. I just sat there and stared. I turned and looked at the door, praying it wouldn't open. Thud, 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 thud. I screamed again and clutched my head in my hands. Go away! I screamed. Go away! Get out of my house! Silence. And then a terrible screeching. You invited me. I heard you say my name. You called me here. Stop it! I don't know how I had the nerve, the bravery, the presence of mind to answer that thing, to talk back, but somehow the words came out, fueled by fear and bewilderment and adrenaline. Silence again. Then the terrible, terrible laughter. God, I can't even describe it. A screeching, high-pitched, manic laughter. Evil. Pure evil compacted into that sound. I thought I would go crazy if I listened to it too long. Like it was burrowing into my mind and hijacking my thoughts, making them revolt. My mind, not under my command, but just spinning out of control, my thoughts rebelling without sense. Utterly terrifying, nauseating. I blacked out, and then I was in my bed. I was so confused, and inclined to believe that the whole previous few hours had been a dream. A nightmare. I sat up in bed, and there was someone sitting on my chair beside my desk. The figure again. I scrambled out of bed. Get out of my house, get out of my house. Whoa, whoa. The figure leapt to its feet, and I saw then that this time it was only my brother, Eric. We both stared at each other for a moment, and then my brother started laughing, out of relief. Normally, both of us would have laughed together. You know, that moment of shared ease after tension when you laugh with another person. I couldn't laugh though. When Eric noticed that he was just laughing on his own, it made his own laughter dry up quickly. He trailed off and cleared his throat, looking awkward. I feel so bad now, thinking about that expression. I should have laughed with him, just to make him feel more at ease. I wasn't thinking at the time. Sorry to frighten you, bud, he said finally. I tried calling you earlier, but didn't get any answer for hours. Figured something might be wrong, so I came over to check. I was right. You knocked yourself out cold there? I got a doctor to make a house call. You have mild concussion. Right, I said. Right, thanks for checking up on me. What happened? I'm being haunted by a malicious entity because I uttered and propagated its name to thousands all over the world through the power of the internet. And this creature took it as an invitation to infect my life and leech out my energy, and I'm utterly terrified, and I don't know what to do. I must have tired myself out, I said. Fainted. You knocked over your coffee cup, he said, pointing at my desk. Wrecked your laptop. I nodded. Eric looked puzzled at my lack of remorse or surprise. Are you sure you're okay? He said. I'm fine, I replied, trying to summon a smile. Just, feeling out of sorts. I'll be fine though. I have the desktop computer I can use downstairs, just need to wire it up again. I was just thinking about the logistics of it and all. Already done it, he said with a wide smile. Got it all set up for you on the table downstairs. Want to come see? I obliged. I was grateful, of course. Eric was always going above and beyond the line of duty when it came to looking out for me, his little brother. But I just wanted Eric to leave. I didn't want my awesome, caring big brother getting involved in this mess. After a few more concerned questions, he did leave finally. Look after yourself. Eat a good dinner tonight, okay? I nodded. I was used to following directions from Eric. It gave me sense of comfort. He was older than me by 7 years, and when our parents had died when I was 10, he had become big brother as well as mom and dad to me. Sometimes he forgot I was a grown man and still wanted to fuss over me. Sometimes I still let him. He had left. I realized that I would be the polite thing to do to wave goodbye, to reassure him that I was okay. I went to the window and peered out. Eric was backing out from the driveway. I waved at him and smiled. He waved back, and behind him sat a tall, faceless figure, waving its long, claw-like hand at me. By the time I managed to get my body working again, I ran out of my front door to stop Eric, to warn him that he was somehow in danger. But he'd already eased out of the driveway and disappeared down the road. I tried calling his cell phone. No answer. He never did answer when he drove. I wrung my hands in desperation. There was no one else I could call. He lived alone. I could go after him, though. I got into my car, and it wouldn't start. I slammed my hands on the wheel in frustration. I went inside and just started calling his mobile, and then calling his home, every 5 minutes. So he would pick up when he reached his destination. So I could speak to him. So I could warn him. Finally, there was an answer on his phone. Eric? Eric, listen to me, you're in danger. I was interrupted by loud static and a screeching, screaming sound that made me feel physically terrified and nauseous. I'm never going to leave, you invited me. And the phone went dead. I put my shoes on, got out of the house, and I just started running. I ran the hour it takes to get to Eric's house in 40 minutes. His car was on the driveway. The lights were on. He was home. I banged on the door. No reply. I tried phoning him again. No signal. I yelled his name, pacing up and down in front of his house. Perhaps he was in the bathroom? I knocked and screamed and yelled, with no reply from him. I could think of nothing to do except just pacing up and down aimlessly, worry chewing my nerves and fraying my thoughts, leaving me incoherent. Then the door opened. Oh, Eric, thank. I went to the door, but the doorway was empty. Eric? I called inside. No reply. Perhaps he was injured inside. I had no idea how the door had opened, and yes, it was freaking me out, but I swallowed my fear because I had to help Eric. His car was in front of his house, so he must be inside. I went into the living room. The light was on, but he wasn't there. Not in the kitchen either. I was calling his name, repeatedly, but getting no reply. My voice was getting hoarse. I checked each of the bedrooms. Nothing. I tried the bathroom, and there he was. My heart leapt with joy for just a split second, until my happiness turned into heartbreaking disappointment and then utter terror and revulsion. It was standing there in front of me, the tall figure without a face. It started to bend. It bent at the waist. As the crown of its head bent parallel to the floor, I saw then that it wasn't faceless. Its face was on the very top of its head, on the crown of its head, large round black eyes, no nostrils, a huge mouth filled with rotting teeth. Grinning at me, it was on all fours, staring up at me with its terrible face on top of its head that was now towards me. This was too much. I broke out of my paralysis, ready to run. I took a breath and took a step, and it lunged towards me. It had a long, claw-like arm. It was on all fours, and it only touched me on the leg. I was wearing shorts, and it had brushed its hand against the bare skin on my calf. I screamed and jerked away. It was no longer touching me, but it was as though it had burned my skin. The pain was like nothing else I have ever felt in my life. A sour, stinging pain, like someone was injecting me with bleach and vinegar and setting my pain nerves on fire. I couldn't move. My vision seemed to be slipping away, and then all at once it was gone. My vision cleared, and the figure wasn't there. My leg, I bent and reached for my leg, ran my fingers down my skin. I was expecting blood or a wound, because that's what it had felt like it had torn my skin or caused a burn or something. I ran my hand up and down my skin. Nothing. Not a mark. No pain anymore. I must have passed out, because when I woke up, I was still on Eric's bathroom floor, but it was daytime. I got to my feet, and I was crying, yelling Eric's name, and I frantically repeated last night's search. Ran through all the rooms. His car was still on the driveway, but he was gone. That's the most sickening part of this. Where is he? My poor brother, what's become of him? Why has he been dragged into all of this? Because he is an important part of my life? I feel absolutely wretched. What have I brought upon him? In desperation, I sat down on his sofa, and I called everyone I could think of, in the vain hope that he may have left his car home and traveled afoot somewhere. Except, I knew the hopeless truth. That thing, that creature had done something to him. And it was all my fault. I tried to get up to do something. I almost collapsed back onto the seat. My leg, it felt so weak. I looked at it. It had turned ashen gray. The skin looked thin where the creature had touched me. It brought it all home. This creature is real. Its effects are real. And then I realized what a terrible thing I have done, putting the thing's name on Reddit. I had spread its evil name, the doorway to its invitation, its summoning to insert itself and its evil into other people's lives. I needed to delete it, the story and its name, before it could spread any further. If I couldn't save my brother, perhaps I could save others. My leg was like a dead weight now, and I had to limp, dragging it to Eric's computer. On Reddit, I couldn't see the post anywhere. I couldn't even log in to my old account. It's there, but I can't access it. And now I see it's not a glitch, it's by its evil design, so that its name would be left there for everyone to read. So I can't delete my account or the story. I can't message the mods of that sub telling them to delete a story on an account I don't have access to. And besides, would they believe me when I tell them why? In the time it has taken for me to type all this, my leg has turned sickly gray, and when I press it, it's like nothing is there underneath the skin. My lower leg seems to have turned hollow. It feels, I can't describe it, like it has rotted away from the inside. Now it's spreading to my thigh. I don't think there is anything can do for myself, but there's only one thing that I can do to minimize the damage. I need to warn you all, but I can't tell you what the submission was, because that would involve typing the name out again. It would involve you reading the name. I'm stuck. Just having the name out there puts you in danger. But what can I do? Please be careful what you get into. Be careful what you read, because sometimes the things you read online are real, even when you think they're not.